Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this delicious lunch. I am going to get us started on our Fireside Chat really quickly. Real briefly, my name is Taylor. I am the Youth DV Prevention Coordinator with Black Revolt against domestic violence. If you have seen either of our amazing youth interns today, Rachel, if you want to raise your hand, and then Mercedes, if you want to raise your hand. We are absolutely blessed to have so many young people who are interested in communicating about healthy relationships. Yes? Brilliant. I want to connect us to our amazing survivor and advocate. We are so grateful today to be joined by Monica Paz. She is a powerful advocate for our community and a survivor who's graciously agreed to share her story with us today. Monica, I'd like to turn it over to you to introduce yourself with name, pronouns, and whatever else you'd like to share with us.
Hi everyone. My name is Monica Paz. I use she, her pronouns. As y'all can see, I'm a trans woman of color that was born in El Salvador back during the Revolutionary War, the Civil War in El Salvador back in the 80s. A little bit of my backstory: when I was born, my parents migrated to the United States, leaving me. Well, I actually did not meet my father. I was born after he had already migrated. My mom gave birth to me and left me at 3 months old with as a care of my grandmother, who raised me until the age of 9 years old, which is when I was fortunate enough to move here to the United States in Los Angeles, California, where I was raised for the majority of my life. It was a very hard upbringing, obviously, because I consider my grandmother my mother, and I was separated from her at 9 years old, and it felt like my world was tumbling and breaking. When I moved to LA, it was a very hard coming to terms with a new country, new language, new friends, having to kind of adapt to a new family, which was unknown because I actually had a brother that was born in the United States that I got to meet for the very first time and who was not willing to give his position as the only child, and so made my life pretty miserable. And then when I started realizing that my gender didn't match my identity, it was even a bigger of an issue with, just getting accepted by my family and so forth. I came out in the beginning, at the time, at 13 years old, to my parents, as what I thought back then was me being gay, and that didn't go well. I think that's where a lot of the first time of abuse came at the age of 13. So I decided to keep it to myself for a couple of years, until the age of almost 15, where I decided to come out again, but this time I actually told them that I was not gay, that I felt that I was different. I did say trans, and that led to not only further physical abuse, but me getting kicked out of my house at the age of 15 and ending up in the streets of Hollywood. I resorted to sex work in order to survive. I didn't know how else to survive, how else to make my life or my ends meet. I resorted to drugs to cope with the reality of me having to do sex work. And as time went by, I started to see the reality of life and society, especially for trans women, people of color. Believe it or not, there's a lot of additional barriers, even as a sex worker. I was trafficked. I had numerous, what you call pimps, that were trying to also basically dictate my life and what I did and how I did it and where I went and so forth. And that was just one of the many layers. The worst layers of that came from the police. back in the 90s when I started doing sex work in Hollywood, especially given the fact that we're not talking about San Francisco where there were actually a little bit more rights. We're talking back in the 90s and the early 2000s in Hollywood when there were actually no rights, especially if you were trans and you were a sex worker. I experienced police brutality, false imprisonment, I'm not even gonna say numerous because that's actually calling it short. I was probably in and out of jail a good 30, 40 times throughout the years that I was in Hollywood, just for being trans and for walking down the street, for looking the way that I looked, for being the color that I was. For also being an immigrant. It was just so many different, additional layers just for my identity. In the midst of all that, I obviously was getting to the point where I was tired of the lifestyle that I was living because I felt like I could do more and I was meant to do more and to be of greater purpose. However, I ended up in a relationship that turned into the very worst experience of domestic violence that I had encountered. I mentioned this earlier to Taylor that was one of the many reasons that now that I play back, I was engaging to kind of like put into realization or to actually understand that it was part of my experience and part of my life. Because I thought that the main reason why I moved to San Francisco literally 8 years ago was because one of my very best friends, who at the time I almost lost due to her health condition, she was HIV positive, she's another trans woman of color. They had told me that if I wanted to save her life, I needed to bring her up here to San Francisco. And she knew this, but she was actually she was hesitant of actually doing the move. And she asked me, because that's my play daughter, she called me playing like mom. So she said, Mom, if you move with me to San Francisco, I will make that move, but I won't move to San Francisco without you. And so I thought that was the only reason why I moved here. But now that I'm playing it back as I was sitting there having lunch, I realized that along with the fact that I was freeing my abuser at that time was the reason why I moved up here 8 years ago. When I did arrive, it was very hard to kind of like find myself here in the Bay Area, knowing that I was raised in LA for the majority of my life. And even though I was able to get her into a safe place and she was able to get her health back in order, I fell back into the same lifestyle of sex work and also drugs. And it was a big realization, I think, for me, when I ended up in another abusive relationship here in the Bay Area. And that's what led to me deciding to change my life. And it was because of the same daughter that was in an incredible program that at that time saved her life, which is San Francisco Safe House, which had a transitional home where they welcomed everybody, including not only cisgender women, but also trans women. I don't know, okay. Trans women and gender non-conforming individuals, that I was able to actually move into the home with her and change my life around. I completed the program and that led to me leaving that lifestyle behind and decided to enroll in school, to start work within the same community that's helped save and shape my life. I started working for an LGBTQ federally qualified health center for almost 5 years. And just about 2 years ago, I was caught up in another domestic violence relationship, but this time around it was the most horrific and the most violent one I had ever experienced. And I realized that even though I had numerous domestic violence relationships in my past, things evolve and these abusers evolve as well. The things that I was facing now was nothing compared to anything else I had ever lived. And that's the reality. I had thought that I had already lived through the worst. And for me to be saying today that what I just lived not more than 2 years ago was even worse than anything I had ever experienced goes to show the type of abuse that these people are bringing upon us. And things change, which is why I feel that policies need to change, laws need to change, people's perspectives on just the whole domestic violence needs to change. And the way that we work and support and are there for survivors need to change as well. And we need to listen to them and actually hold them in spaces where they are the ones that have the experience because they're the ones that lived through it and are surviving. So that's just a little bit of my story.
Thank you so much for sharing just a bit of your wisdom with us, Monica. I do want to pause and say your story reflects both unimaginable pain and incredible resilience. Looking back, can you tell us what moments or communities gave you that push or that courage to move from space as a survivor to space as an advocate?
So this is a good part, I think. This time around, I was fortunate enough to have remembered working with someone that is one of my heroes, someone that saved my life, and somebody that I have to thank and actually mention that I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for her, and that's Yojo Kim, who works with San Francisco Asian Women's Shelter. But I don't want to cry, I want to get emotional, because every time I do, I mention her, I do get that way. But it's because of the power that she holds, it's because of the person that she is, it's because of the spaces that she makes so safe for all of us, for the visibility that she helps bring. I remember that while I was at work, literally trying to get away from my abuser, I remember Dr. Tate mentioned this earlier, they are doing tactics that make it so much more impossible for us to be able to leave these situations safely. This abuser of mine literally took away everything of mine. All of my savings, stole my identity, got all of my legal documents, got into all of my email accounts, ported my numbers out without permission to different devices so that he would be able to basically overtake everything that was mine. And as much as I tried for almost a year to kind of flee, he made it impossible, and he kept telling me, you're never gonna leave. You're never gonna be able to get away without me tracking you down and making sure that you never have anything. And I had to think outside of the box, and I had to really regroup and think, where and how am I gonna get out of the situation without hurting myself and hurting my pet, who is my baby, who is also part of my reason for actually having survived, because she gave me purpose and reason to continue fighting and not giving up. And it was then that I decided to call Yojo Kim, who came to my agency and literally met me in the places and in the times that was most inconspicuous without him actually knowing, which would be during my work. And we decided to work out a plan in which I am so grateful, because she always told me, my main concern is your safety, everything else can wait.
Hell yes.
We're gonna make sure that you're able to get away, that you're able to be somewhere at the right time and at the right moment, where when you make that decision and take that step, there's no way that he's gonna find you, and there's no reason that you're gonna ever have to go back. And those are some of the things that I think that we need to understand, that we need to provide survivors, because if they don't have that, the possibility of them actually being able to leave the situations is very minimal. And the chances that their lives might be at greater risk is very high. I was so grateful to have Yojo by my side, to have Asian women by my side, because they placed me in a hotel. I was able to flee where I lived for almost 4 years, and we started working from there. From going to the police station, mind you, I had gone to the police station like 4 or 5 different times.
Hello.
And I got rejected and told, come back when you have actual evidence. Come back when you have actual proof. I could not have had any more proof, but the only thing that I probably was lacking was bringing him to them. But everything else was there, and they decided not to take my case. And I was left numerous times crying in their little hallway with nowhere to go as he ported my number out and he gave me no ways and means of communicating with absolutely no one. Yojo was there to help relieve all of these things, ask for FMLA leave from my employer so that I can do the things that I needed to do to make sure that my safety was my main priority, like going to the police station, filing a restraining order. She helped me also get an emergency transfer for me to relocate to a safe place. She also made sure that I didn't have to worry about the daily life, which included my rent, just my daily expenses since I was no longer working and I had no type of safety or savings because he had taken everything from me. And that's where the beginning of everything started to fall back in place for me. I was fortunate enough to go alongside her and Asian Women's Shelter to the Day of Advocacy in the state capitol, where I was able to actually meet some of the most incredible, powerful survivors and organizations such as Black Women Revolt. And we were able to utilize and combine our voice collaboratively in a way that impacted and that we were able to kind of like do the things that I feel that at that moment almost felt like was getting diminished or actually being taken from us.
I have so many things to pull from your story. So I just wanted to nod that you spoke about the impact of economic abuse and also tech abuse on your ability to leave and how that changes quickly, right? And if we do not have laws or advocates or the ability to meet survivors with what they are experiencing, we fail to address what people need to survive. Also, props to Yojo, but also props to Monica, because you made it.
That's right.
We're so glad you are here. I'm also lending an ear to what I think as you speak with advocacy that some people get wrong, which is that survivors are not people that we do not interact or see. They are your friends, they are your coworkers, they are your family, and they deserve everything we have at our disposal. So you spoke about transforming erasure into power and visibility, including Advocacy Day. What does it mean to you personally, but also collectively for trans women of color and other marginalized survivors, not just to be seen, but to shape solutions themselves?
I actually started to write a couple of things because I want to make sure that I mention some of the things that are important to me. Being seen for me is actually very, very important, but I think that as a trans woman of color, we seem to be the least seen when it comes to the conversation,
Yes.
especially with this current administration. It seems that we took a few steps forward towards making equality accessible for everyone, but in a matter of, 8 months, we have seen how all of that has been not only taken from us, but it also has taken us back 40 years in a matter of these 8 months. So I think that question is very important when it comes to speaking about people from my community, especially trans women of color, because one thing that I do know for sure is that as COVID hit, the amount and the percentage of domestic violence that started occurring, especially amongst trans women of color, went incredibly high.
That's right.
And as these numbers increased, the amount of services and agencies and funding that were allocated to serve our community, including trans women of color, went down. So if the numbers are up and the amount of money and services are so much less, you can understand where the disparity lies. And that says a lot.
Yeah.
So if we don't have these spaces and have the opportunity to include trans women of color, we need to do more. So I think that part of that, being an ally or being someone that is supportive of our community means that we have to stand stand next to them and truly be there so that they can feel like they are also part of the conversation that needs to be had in these spaces.
And then final question, how can anyone who identifies as an ally stand beside but not in front of those who are impacted by IPV or intimate partner violence?
So I think being an ally obviously means listening to them rather than speaking, letting them hold the conversation, be the authors and the narrators in the conversation, and actually listening to what they're actually saying. Sometimes people have conversations, but it's actually being able to understand what they're conveying to you and putting that to good use, rather than you thinking that because you're an expert, you're going to be able to kind of dictate and narrate what they're trying to tell you. You need to really, truly meet them where they're at. There's a lot of different layers when it comes to being a trans woman of color and a survivor, and probably a monolingual speaker, or probably an immigrant, or probably homeless. There's so many different layers that sometimes are involved in someone's story, and we need to truly hone into what they're saying and understand what comes first for them, and let them be the narrators to tell you what it is that they need. It also means using privilege not to take up space, but to make space for them when they're not able to actually have it. It means standing shoulder to shoulder, amplifying survivor voices rather than replacing them. To stand beside us is to believe us, not to question us.
Yeah.
To follow our leadership because we are experts in our own experience. And to understand that true change only happens when those most impacted are at the center of the conversations, not conversations that are being held for us. Allies don't save us, they walk with us. Too often people hear the word survivor and immediately see it as a downfall, something that's broken, something that's hard to rise from. But for me, being a survivor and being a trans woman of color has never been the end of my story. It's been the beginning of my story. It has been the beginning of my strength, and now the newfound foundation in which I have found purpose in. Every scar that I carry, and every scar that every trans woman has carried long before me, that built our resilience. And it also gave us responsibility for not only myself, but everyone else that came before me, and everyone else that's in the same shoes that I was simply just in a couple of years ago. And I want to carry that forward, to be that voice for the most silenced, the most marginalized, the most underserved, especially those from within my own Sikh community.
Thank you, Monica. Can I get a round of applause for incredible? Your voice helps us see the work ahead more clearly, and we are deeply honored to share space with you today. And for those of you taking notes, because I'm going to take a note out of our other Monica's playbook, I just heard like 5 areas of access that we can work on, which is what happens when we ask survivors what their experiences are, instead of guessing or looking at a 5 or 10 or 15 or 20-year-old study. Thank you so much, Monica. I'm going to have our Beyond Housing panel come on up.